You got the thing you wanted. Maybe it was the job, the salary, the relationship, the house, the number on the scale, the follower count. And for a moment, a brief, quiet moment, it felt like enough. Then it didn't. This is one of the strangest and most consistent experiences in human life. You pursue something with genuine conviction, you reach it, and then, almost immediately, the mind begins scanning for the next thing. The satisfaction evaporates, the goalpost moves, and you are left wondering whether there is something wrong with you, or whether something about the whole system of wanting and getting is fundamentally broken. There isn't something wrong with you, but the system may not be working the way you assumed. The ancient Greeks had a word for the kind of craving that can never be satisfied. They called it pleonexia, a compulsive desire to always have more, to always acquire beyond what one actually needs. Aristotle saw it not as ambition, but as a kind of spiritual poverty. The person enslaved by pleonexia was, in his view, not flourishing, but suffering, regardless of how much they accumulated. He contrasted this with eudaimonia, a word usually translated as happiness, but which more accurately means something closer to living well or flourishing in accordance with your nature and values. For Aristotle, the good life was not a destination, it was a practice. And one of the central practices of that life was learning to distinguish between what you genuinely need and what you have simply been conditioned to want. That distinction is harder than it sounds. The psychologist Tim Kasser has spent decades studying what he calls the high cost of materialism. His research found that people who organize their lives primarily around external goals, wealth, status, appearance, fame, consistently report lower well-being, more anxiety, less meaning, and weaker relationships than people whose central goals are intrinsic: connection, creativity, contribution, personal growth. This held across cultures and income levels. More was not making people happier. In many cases, the pursuit of more was making them measurably less happy. This doesn't mean desire is the enemy or that ambition is a character flaw. It means that not all desires are equal, and that the kind of wanting you orient your life around shapes the quality of the life you actually live. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome were thinking about this too, in their own way. Seneca wrote that the person who doesn't know how much is enough will never have enough. Audimus Aurelius returned repeatedly to the idea of contentment, not passive resignation, but an active orientation to what is already present. Epictetus, who had been born into slavery, argued that the only reliable path to freedom was distinguishing between what is within your control and what is not, and learning to want the former more than the latter. None of them were arguing for poverty or indifference. They were arguing that the habit of looking outward for satisfaction, to the next achievement, the next acquisition, the next approval, was a habit that quietly consumed a life. Modern neuroscience offers a related explanation, though it uses different language. The brain has a system sometimes described as the wanting system, driven largely by the neurotransmitter dopamine. It is designed to motivate pursuit, not to reward arrival. When you anticipate getting something you want, dopamine activity increases. When you actually get it, the spike is brief, and the system quickly recalibrates, already searching for the next anticipated reward. This is often called the hedonic treadmill, the psychological tendency to return to a relatively stable level of satisfaction, regardless of what you gain or lose. This isn't a flaw in the design. From an evolutionary perspective, a mind that remained permanently satisfied after each achievement would stop striving. It would be outcompeted by a mind that kept wanting, kept pursuing, kept seeking advantage. The wanting machinery was not built for contentment. It was built for continuation. The problem is that you are living in a world that has engineered itself to exploit this machinery at industrial scale. Every advertising message, every social media feed, every product launch is built on the same foundational promise that this specific thing will finally be the thing that makes you feel complete. The economy of attention runs on manufactured inadequacy. If you already felt like enough, you would need less, and a great deal of modern commercial life depends on you never quite feeling like enough. This is not a conspiracy, it is just the logic of systems optimized for engagement and consumption. But recognizing it is the beginning of something important. The Buddhist tradition has been examining this problem for over 2,000 years. The Pali word tanha is often translated as craving, but its literal meaning is closer to thirst, a thirst that perpetuates itself rather than being quenched by what it consumes. The first noble truth of Buddhist philosophy is often described as the observation that suffering is woven into ordinary human experience. The second noble truth identifies tanha as one of its central sources, not desire itself, but clinging desire, the kind that grasps at permanent satisfaction from inherently impermanent things. The Buddhist solution isn't to stop experiencing life, it's to relate differently to what arises, to hold experience lightly rather than clutching it, to notice the wanting without being entirely defined by it. This is subtler than it sounds and considerably harder to practice, but the underlying observation is precise. Suffering is not caused by having desires, it is caused by believing that satisfying a desire will resolve the deeper hunger underneath it. That deeper hunger is real, and it deserves to be taken seriously. Psychologist Abraham Maslow proposed that human needs exist in a kind of hierarchy, physiological survival at the base, moving upward through safety, belonging, esteem, and finally toward what he called self-actualization, the experience of living in alignment with your deepest capacities and values. Maslow's model has been criticized and refined many times over, but the central insight remains useful, that many of the things people pursue aggressively, money, status, admiration, are often attempts to meet needs that those things cannot actually satisfy. The person relentlessly accumulating wealth may be trying to feel safe. The person obsessively building status may be trying to feel worthy. The person who cannot rest until they have achieved the next thing may be trying to prove to themselves or to someone long ago that they are enough. The pursuit is real. The need underneath it is real. But the solution being reached for may be the wrong one. So what does enough actually feel like? It is worth asking this directly because most people have never stopped long enough to answer it. Not enough defined by comparison, not enough relative to what your neighbor has or what your former self wanted or what the algorithm says you should want. Enough defined from the inside, enough as a felt sense of sufficiency. Enough as the experience of not needing this moment to be different from what it is. The philosopher and essayist Alain de Botton has written about what he calls status anxiety, the pervasive modern fear of not mattering, of being judged inadequate, of falling short of the standards set by a culture that constantly ranks and compares. He argues that this anxiety is not a personal failing, but a structural condition of modern societies built around meritocracy. When a society tells you that your position in it reflects your worth as a person, falling short doesn't feel like bad luck, it feels like a verdict on your character. This conflation of achievement with worth, of success with value, may be one of the most quietly damaging ideas in contemporary life. Because the logic of enough cannot begin until you separate the two. Your worth is not a function of what you have produced, earned, accumulated, or demonstrated. That is not a motivational platitude. It is a philosophical position about the basis of human value, one that most ethical traditions, whether religious, secular, Stoic, Buddhist, or humanist, share in their different ways. The practical question is not whether you believe it abstractly, it is whether you live as if you believe it. There is a difference between striving because you're curious, because you care about something, because the work itself has meaning,
and striving because stillness feels unbearable, because stopping, even briefly, makes you feel like you are falling behind, because rest has come to feel like a moral failure. One of these is energizing, the other is exhausting. And many people have lived so long inside the second that they have forgotten the first is possible. Enough is not a number. It is not a position. It is not something that arrives when the conditions are finally right. It is a practice, a daily, quiet, slightly rebellious practice of asking what you actually need, of noticing the difference between genuine desire and manufactured craving, of recognizing when the wanting has detached from any real purpose and is simply feeding itself. Aristotle called the good life a practice. The Stoics called contentment a discipline. The Buddhist tradition calls presence a training. The language is different. The observation is the same. You will not one day simply arrive at enough, but you can begin today to notice when you have already had it and to let that, just for a moment, be sufficient. You got the thing you wanted. The question was never really about the thing.